Hailed as the son of two kings, Lij Iyasu belonged to the ruling family of Wello, as well as the royal house of Shewa, the former being Muslims, while the latter were Orthodox Christians. This distinguished dual ancestry was something in which Abeto Lij Iyasu found much honor and pride, as the epithet son of two kings is contained in his official royal seal and insignia. Furthermore, in bridging the gap between Muslim aristocracy and Christian royalty, Lij Iyasu also claimed Solomonic descent through his matrilineal ancestry, as was customary and even mandatory for each and every king of Abyssinia. However, what set Iyasu apart from all the Abyssinian kings is the fact that he also claimed to have been of noble Sayyid stock, tracing this back from his patrilineal ancestry, which he attributed to the famous Mamluk dynasty in Wello, which was established by Babo Nur-ad-Din and other relatives of Sheikh Nur Hussein, himself a supposed descendant of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It has been reported that some of the Turkish diplomats who frequented the prince had even encouraged him to document his noble lineage, prompting Iyasu to commission official documents illustrating his patrilineal family tree, which traces its roots back to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Thus, not only did he fashion himself as the son of two kings, but he also claimed the unique attribute of having descended from both Prophet Sulaiman and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Lij Iyasu had received a Christian upbringing during his childhood years, which he had spent in Addis Ababa under the care and instruction of his grandfather, King Menelik II. While residing in the imperial court, Lij Iyasu received a very privileged education and was reared according to royal protocol. As part of his preparation and training for governorship and administration, Lij Iyasu received the religious and military training necessary to carry out his future responsibilities as a member of the Christian Shewa nobility. He also underwent a form of modern European education. Although his unique and ambitious claim of having been both a Christian noble and a sharif from the household of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was certainly unheard of anywhere else in the world, Lij Iyasu's close and indisputable proximity with Islamic culture and heritage was not altogether unique within the Shewan royal family, for he was not the only prince who had been the issue of a Muslim parents. As a matter of fact, his cousin Lij Tafarai was the son of Yeshimebet Ali, an Oromo Muslim woman whose family converted to Christianity when she married into Shewan royal family, becoming the wife of Ras Makonnen. However, though they shared a similar background, the two princes were diametrically opposed in their sentiments and affinity towards Islam. On the one hand, Prince Iyasu came to be characterized and even criticized for his eccentric and somewhat boastful claims regarding his Muslim ancestry. He was also known to have cultivated intimate and genuine alliances with many Muslim tribes, noble families, and military regimes, both internal and external to Ethiopia. Whereas to the contrary, his cousin, 𝗤𝗏𝗡 Makonnen, did everything in his power to conceal the fact that his mother was an Oromo Muslim who had converted to Christianity, presumably for political reasons. For many years, even after he ascended to the throne in 1930, 𝗤𝗏𝗡 Makonnen, or as he later came to be known, Emperor Haile Selassie, concealed the fact that his mother was of Muslim ancestry. This fact was perceived as detrimental to his image and reputation as a full-blooded Shewa noble. Lij Iyasu was designated as the next king of Abyssinia in the year 1909, when his grandfather King Menelik II was struck by severe illness, rendering him incapable of continuing his official duties. However, due to the fact that Lij Iyasu was only 14 years old in 1909, Ras Makonnen was appointed as his regent and made responsible for administering government affairs on behalf of the young prince until he reached maturity and adulthood. The crisis of succession that resulted in Lij Iyasu's appointment in the first place almost repeated itself when in 1911 Ras Makonnen passed away, leaving his position vacant. When talk of appointing a new regent was being discussed, Lij Iyasu defiantly refused the proposal and insisted instead that he would be more than capable of ruling without a guardian. However, since King Menelik was still alive in 1911, Iyasu could not be crowned king, so he ruled as a prince, commencing his unofficial reign as the king in waiting on April 10th, 1911. When King Menelik II eventually died from his illness 2 years later, in December 1913, a delegation of Shewa nobles gathered in Addis Ababa to decide how they would manage the situation at hand. Since they were still unwilling to recognize Lij Iyasu as their veritable king and emperor due to his very evident Muslim ancestry, but also due to the fact that he was still a teenager. Therefore, they agreed instead to a compromise wherein his father, Ras Makonnen, would be made a negus with the authority to reign over the northern regions, effectively making him the de facto king of his ancestral kingdom in 𝗖𝗢𝗡𝗦, as well as the other vast territories incorporating Tigray and 𝗣𝗠, while his son, Lij Iyasu, was to remain uncrowned but still in charge of the southern region, ruling from Addis Ababa. Although this compromise was somewhat acceptable to the Shewa nobility, it left others fearful and unsettled by the prospect of transferring the entire kingdom over to covert Muslims who were already subject to rumors about their political conversion, and of being proponents within a covert Muslim conspiracy to infiltrate and Islamize the Abyssinian kingdom from within. Yet despite these deeply rooted fears and suspicions, Lij Iyasu's reign was marked by a great deal of uncertainty and rapid socio-economic changes. At a time when Ethiopia had lost its long-reigning and most influential figure, King Menelik II, alongside men such as Ras Makonnen, within a very short period of time. While in Europe, events were in motion that would trigger the Great War of 1914, which would devastate Europe and her territorial subjects. All of these major catastrophes happened only years apart. Ascending to power during the most tumultuous and unprecedented epoch would have been challenging for even the most experienced and popular of rulers. However, for a teenage prince whose reign was not even sanctified by a coronation, the obstacles were seemingly insurmountable, as he was still mistrusted and maligned by a number of critics who found him to be too invested in Muslim affairs, both domestic and foreign. And yet despite his youth, Lij Iyasu proved himself to be of resolute spirit and vigorous ambition. The young prince continued his grandfather's legacy by further modernizing Ethiopia through various reforms and initiatives, such as the establishment of Ethiopia's first modern police force. Furthermore, Lij Iyasu also advanced the cause for anti-slavery by passing new laws that had been initiated by his predecessor, King Menelik II. Perhaps his most distinguished initiative was one that completely reformed the judicial system by abolishing the arbitrary and superstitious practices that were previously upheld and employed in order to ascertain a person's guilt, thereby establishing the culpability for a crime. One such practice involved the intoxication of prepubescent boys who were then left to wander from house to house until they eventually collapsed. The house in which the boy awoke was then designated as the residence of the person who had committed the crime. As such, Lij Iyasu was an atypical Abyssinian king by interacting and sympathizing with the deprived Muslim communities who resided in Ethiopia, but were altogether dispossessed of basic civic rights such as being recognized as citizens. In fact, he was reported to have spent very little time in Addis, as he was often engaged in extended official visits to Muslim enclaves such as Harar and the Afar regions, where he would visit masajid and contract marriages with the daughters of influential Muslim chieftains. It must also be noted that upon ascending to the throne, Lij Iyasu banished his aunt 𝗤𝗢𝗇𝗏 and his grandmother Queen 𝗤𝗢𝗔 from the palace, perpetrating an act that was widely perceived as an open act of enmity and gross ingratitude towards the very people who had raised him as a child in the palace. Whatever his true intentions may have been, Lij Iyasu's actions and policies towards the Muslim community were distinct and evident. He was an advocate and a patron for the Muslim cause. It has been noted that following Ras Makonen's death, Lij Iyasu drew much closer to his father, Ras Makonnen, who supposedly inspired him to take pride in his noble Mamdach lineage. The prince was even photographed on more than one occasion while wearing distinct Islamic attire and also sporting the loincloth and dagger that was customarily worn by Afar tribesmen. Lij Iyasu is also reported to have divorced his Christian wife, 𝗲𝗡𝗏𝗏, and subsequently contracting a number of matrimonial alliances with neighboring Muslim tribes under the reign and authority of important Afar and Oromo chiefs. Barely a year into his reign as the Prince-elect of Ethiopia, the world was divided into two distinct camps as the Allied and Central Powers locked horns in a global struggle for supremacy and domination. Very early on in the war, the German Emperor Wilhelm II sought to cultivate a close working relationship with the young prince in the hopes of enlisting Ethiopia into the war on the side of the Germans and their Ottoman allies. Ethiopia's independent status stood out amidst a region which had been virtually entirely colonized by the Allied forces of Britain and France. Consequently, the Germans were very interested in securing Ethiopia's support and cooperation, as it would grant them a strategic outpost from which to mount devastating and significant attacks onto nearby British and French colonies, thereby compelling the Allied forces to withdraw from the Suez Canal, which was Britain's jugular vein and her most lucrative trade route and a maritime corridor through which soldiers from Australia, India and New Zealand were able to be transported into Europe as reinforcements. German control over these strategic ports would literally paralyze the Allied forces both economically and militarily. In January 1915, the Germans assigned Leo Frobenius to do their bidding in East Africa in a similar fashion to which the British had assigned T.E. Lawrence to Arabia as an agent of chaos. Leo was a man of many talents and high accomplishments. His reputation as a renowned adventurer and as an expert archaeologist brought him close to the attention of Kaiser William II, culminating in a friendship between the two men. Leo was put in charge of a small task force comprised of Turks and German officers, all disguised as academic researchers, operating under the same pretext as used by T.E. Lawrence during his early Reconnaissance missions in Arabia. The group of men then commenced their journey by sailing out from Arabia, heading towards the Eritrean coastal region, where the party was intercepted by the Italian guards and arrested immediately. Their mission was uncovered and Leo was surrendered into British custody. He was subsequently deported back to Berlin, where the German command reconfigured its approach and decided to send yet another provocateur into Ethiopia. A few months after Leo had failed his mission to Ethiopia, yet another covert mission was launched by the Germans. At the head of this cohort of spies and agents was a Polish Jew by the name of Solomon Hall. Mr. Hall was well known to the Ethiopians due to his family's long-lasting reputation and solid connections to the Shewa nobility. He was a worthy candidate and one in whom the Germans had invested much hope and aspiration. However, much to their disappointment, the Italian guards blew Solomon's cover almost as soon as he landed in Eritrea. His disingenuous Arabic accent and distinct European features made it all the more difficult to fool the guards. Despite having failed to penetrate the borders, Solomon Hall successfully transferred copies of the secret documents over to intermediaries who were able to convey the information to the Ethiopians in October 1915. Thereafter, the German envoy to Addis Ababa, Friedrich Wilhelm von Seyberg, was instructed to exhaust all avenues by which to convince Lij Iyasu to enter into an alliance with the Ottomans in order to fight against the British and French. Consequently, Frederick carried out a propaganda campaign assuring the Ethiopians that Germany was on the victorious side and that France and Britain were soon to be crushed, thereby guaranteeing imminent victory and promising great prospects for Ethiopia once the war was won by the Germans and their allies. The Ottoman victories against the Allied forces in Gallipoli and Mesopotamia only further enhanced these promises and inspired confidence in the mind of the young and inexperienced prince. According to the distinguished scholar on African studies, J. Spencer Trimingham, Lij Iyasu made no secret of his collegial alliance and favorable sentiments towards the Ottoman Empire. It is in fact well documented and widely attested to that Lij Iyasu was in close and regular contact with the Ottoman envoys and emissaries who arrived in Ethiopia to visit him. The prince was even reported to have made a solemn vow to Islamize Ethiopia altogether when he supposedly made the following statement in the presence of his Muslim audience: "If I do not make Ethiopia Muslim, then I am not Iyasu." In the year 1916, Lij Iyasu is reported to have upped his stakes by further cementing his stance and commitment to the German-Ottoman alliance. In a hitherto unprecedented and very bold executive order, Lij Iyasu officially surrendered his kingdom, Abyssinia, to the religious authority of the Muslim Ottoman Empire. And to mark his commitment to his policy, Lij Iyasu commissioned for the flag of Abyssinia to incorporate a crescent moon and Arabic calligraphy pronouncing the Islamic declaration of faith. This flag was then sent as an official gift to the Ottoman Consul General. Similar flags were then manufactured, and Lij Iyasu ordered that they be dispatched to various Muslim chieftains, accompanied by the prince's promise to organize Muslim fighters into a single military unit, which he would mobilize in preparation for a great jihad. By this point, Lij Iyasu was no longer simply making promises and pronouncing great statements before distinguished Muslim audiences, for he had superseded all of this and reached the stage in which he was literally collaborating with Muslim resistance fighters such as Sayyid Muhammad ibn Abdullah Hassan, who was the leader of the Dervish movement, whom the British disparagingly called the Mad Mullah. On the advice and encouragement of the Ottomans, Lij Iyasu is even reported to have endorsed and supported Sheikh Abdullah Hassan by providing him with a great number of rifles and ammunition against the British and their allies in Somalia. Furthermore, Lij Iyasu is thereafter reported to have galvanized the Muslim inhabitants of 𝗔𝗡𝗡𝗥𝗦, whom he solicited to join his army of Mujahideen as he prepared to lead a war against invading Christians. From as early as 1906, Abyssinia's socio-political stability was being called to question by major European powers such as Britain and France. They were anticipating a potential and terrible civil war to erupt following the death of Menelik II. Furthermore, the controversy and unrest that was sparked during the crisis of succession provided the European pundits further cause for concern. However, of all the terrible consequences that Europe could have computed following the death of Menelik II, none could have imagined that his successor would be a Pan-Islamic advocate and collaborator with the Ottomans and their German patrons. Lij Iyasu's run would not be long-lasting, because the wheels of discontentment were already set in motion when his increasing and noticeable absence from the kingdom's capital city, Addis Ababa, began to become more and more objectionable, while support for his cousin, Rastafari, began to grow steadily. Lij Iyasu was cognizant of his cousin's increasing influence and power, and therefore decided to undermine his impact by granting greater authority to Rastafari's political rivals. However, it wasn't until the year 1916 when tensions reached boiling point, following Lij Iyasu's official dismissal of Rastafari from his post as governor, compelling the latter to abandon his province and to return back to Addis shortly following the Ethiopian New Year, which was celebrated in September 1916. With Rastafari now back in the capital and dispossessed of official duties, a growing number of Shewan representatives and nobles rallied to his support. Lij Iyasu had finally overstepped the line, and they became resolute in their conviction to remove him from power once and for all. Whether by pure coincidence or deliberately designed, some of the Shewan collaborators had acquired information about the Abyssinian flags, which had been customized with Islamic insignia, with which Lij Iyasu formally committed himself to the Ottoman and Somali liberation struggles. It would not be long before news of these flags began to circulate in Addis, as evidence of Iyasu's apostasy from Christianity and his conversion back into Islam, his original religion. And if his close affinity and association with the Muslim community had not already sparked outrage within the Shewan elite, his marriage into Muslim families, as well as his growing alliance with the Germans and their Ottoman clients, could not be interpreted in any other way. Lij Iyasu was a threat to Shewan sovereignty and the pending calamity awaiting to inflict itself onto not only the Abyssinian way of life, but upon the Christian faith itself. Left unabated, the young prince was sure to surrender the kingdom entirely to Muslim influence. The Shewan nobility were not alone in their concerns, as their growing fears were also shared by clerics in the Orthodox 𝗖𝗢𝗇𝗦 Church, who feared that the prince was rapidly transforming their Christian kingdom into a Muslim colony of the Ottomans. On the 12th of September 1916, the French, British and Italian administrations issued a warning to the Ethiopian foreign minister, informing him of Lij Iyasu's complicity with the dervish uprising in Somaliland. They also demanded explanations for this. Thus, the tacit approval and vigorous support of the French, British and Italians, the Shewan royal family formed a united coalition against the young prince, with the aim of instigating a coup d'etat by publicly accusing him of having abandoned Christianity in favor of Islam, thereby forfeiting their right to continue ruling over the kingdom. Following some initial hesitation, the Coptic archbishops pronounced an official edict whereby the Shewan nobility were no longer obliged to render themselves loyal to Lij Iyasu. The religious edict effectively meant that Lij Iyasu was officially deposed from the throne and subsequently excommunicated from the church altogether. On September 27, 1916, only a few days following his official deposition by the Shewan royal family, which was endorsed and consecrated by the Archbishop's official edict, Lij Iyasu received the devastating news that he was no longer in charge and that he had been in fact replaced by his aunt, 𝗤𝗎𝗄, the same aunt whom he had banished from the palace only a few years earlier. Furthermore, Queen 𝗤𝗎𝗄 was permitted to rule only with the regency of Prince Ras Tafari, who had also been banished from his governorship by Lij Iyasu. Under this new political regime, Ras Tafari was officially pronounced the heir apparent to Queen 𝗤𝗎𝗄 and the next king of Abyssinia. Now on the receiving end of the political spectrum, Lij Iyasu sought desperately to overturn the order by mobilizing an army towards the capital. However, his soldiers turned back and disbanded before even reaching the destination. In the wake of this devastating turn of events, the prince's father, Ras Makonnen, who was crowned Negus of the North, mobilized his army in an attempt to salvage the situation. And on October 27, 1916, an army of 80,000 was mobilized to confront Queen 𝗤𝗎𝗄's army in Addis, culminating in the Battle of Segale. Unfortunately for Ras Makonnen, who was subsequently captured by Queen 𝗤𝗎𝗄's army, his reign over the northern territories was also over, as the Queen's army scored a resounding victory in what came to be regarded as the greatest military victory in Ethiopian history, since the Italians were defeated by King Menelik II at the Battle of Adwa in 1896. Now finally confronted by the sobering and somber reality, Lij Iyasu departed from Harar and fled towards the Afar lowlands, where he went into hiding. He was reportedly given shelter and protected by sympathetic Muslim chieftains in the regions of Tigray and parts of Wello. 2 years following Iyasu's fall from grace, the Allies had won the Great War in Europe, and their Ottoman German rivals were completely vanquished. Kaiser Wilhelm's grand ambitions of triggering a global jihad against the French and British had failed tremendously, and the Ottoman Empire was no longer able to recover from the damage inflicted upon her. Lij Iyasu was now stranded within his own country and without any hopes for external support. The British and French consolidated their gains and reinforced their guard in the region, thereby extinguishing any remnant of hope of an Islamic revival anywhere on the continent. Lij Iyasu would therefore spend the next 5 years living the life of a fugitive, constantly evading detection and relying entirely on the patronage and protection of local chieftains who had been sympathetic to his earlier cause. However, his luck finally ran out in the year 1921 when he was tracked down and seized by the Queen's soldiers. He was transported to a holding center in the North Shewan region where he was detained by his aunt, Queen 𝗤𝗎𝗄. Lij Iyasu sought to escape from his imprisonment, however he failed to succeed and was captured once more, and then condemned to spend the rest of his life in captivity. He died only 5 years later, in November 1935. The circumstances surrounding his death and his burial place remain shrouded in mystery, as does his legacy. Lij Iyasu will forever be remembered by those who are familiar with his name and legacy as the prince who was never crowned, and modern historians are still undecided as to whether to refer to him as a prince, a king, or a usurper. Lij Iyasu's personal life and legacy remains largely neglected due to a lack of archival sources concerning this epoch, and due to the oversimplified condemnation of his rule, following Emperor Haile Selassie's campaign to keep Iyasu beyond the margins of public consideration and outside the peripheral margin of world history. With the passage of time and the death of almost everyone involved, the faint traces of his legacy are sure to remain an enduring mystery. The exact date and precise cause of his death were never made public. Furthermore, his place of burial has never been revealed. Rumors and legends abound, but none of them are backed with established fact. Lij Iyasu remains an enigmatic figure to this very day, a man whose character has been defined mostly by his adversaries and critics.